I pulled into my parents' driveway right on time, well, almost. The clock on my dashboard blinked 6:02 a.m., 2 minutes past our agreed meeting. Close enough, I thought, shaking off the morning grogginess and forcing a smile as I spotted my mom stepping out onto the porch, dragging her suitcase behind her. "You're late," she said immediately, her voice slicing through the stillness of the morning. 2 minutes, Mom, I said, laughing lightly, trying to keep things easy. I think I still get points for effort. I climbed out of the car, reaching for the trunk latch to help load the luggage. And that's when I saw her. Lauren, my sister. She strolled out of the house like she owned the world, her suitcase rolling behind her, her smile just a little too bright for 6 in the morning. I froze. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice tight, my hand still on the handle of the trunk. My mom turned to me with a smile too big, too cheerful, and instantly, my stomach dropped. "Oh, Violet, we decided Lauren should come instead of you," she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "She's been so stressed lately. She really needs this trip." For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. Instead of me? This trip, this entire dream, had been my idea. I'd spent the last 2 years working double shifts, skipping vacations, saving every spare penny to pull this off. A full European tour for my parents. Something they'd talked about their whole lives but never been able to afford. Flights, luxury hotels, private tours, every last detail booked and paid for by me. And now, in the span of 5 seconds, it was being handed over to Lauren like a hand-me-down sweater. "Mom, I manage, my throat dry. I planned this. I paid for it. For you." She waved her hand dismissively, brushing away my words like a speck of dust. "And we're so grateful, sweetheart," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "But you're always working so hard. You can always take another trip later. Lauren needs this now." Lauren didn't even bother to look ashamed. She just smirked, casually leaning against the side of the car, her hip cocked in a way that said she already knew she'd won. "Thanks for understanding, sis," she said, oozing fake gratitude. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, my fists clenching at my sides. I felt the heat rising up my neck, the pounding of my heart in my ears. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand why after everything? After all the years of being the dependable one, the invisible one, I was being tossed aside again like I didn't matter. Instead, I swallowed it, like I always did. I forced a smile so tight it hurt my cheeks. "Let's get going then," I said, my voice flat. If they wanted Lauren, fine, they could have Lauren, but they weren't going to enjoy it the way they thought they would. The drive to the airport was suffocating. Lauren chattered nonstop from the backseat, talking about TikToks she'd seen about Paris, what outfits she should pack, how excited she was to go shopping. My mom laughed and chirped back, as if I wasn't even there, as if the seat I occupied in the front wasn't supposed to be empty. My dad sat in stiff silence beside me, pretending to check his phone. When he finally spoke, it was like a slap. "Thank you for driving us, Violet," he said awkwardly. "I know this feels unusual." "Unusual," I repeated under my breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter. That was one word for it. Lauren leaned forward between the seats, her voice grating. "You're not mad, right? I mean, this is really big of you. Letting me go. I could never have afforded this on my own." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. But I still managed to force out, "Of course. Enjoy the trip." By the time we pulled up to the airport drop-off, my hands were trembling from holding it all in. I popped the trunk, unloaded their suitcases, and stood back as my mom hugged me perfunctorily. "Thank you for understanding, sweetheart," she said again. "This really means a lot." I nodded, tight, mechanical. "Sure, Mom." Lauren beamed at me over her shoulder as she wheeled her suitcase away. "Thanks, Violet, you're the best." And just like that, they disappeared into the terminal, laughing and chatting without a backward glance. I stood there for a long moment, the early morning air crisp against my burning skin. Then I turned, walked back to my car, and sat behind the wheel, staring blankly out the windshield. This was supposed to be my moment. Something I had built out of love, out of sacrifice, out of years of being the daughter who never asked for much. And they had handed it to Lauren without a second thought. I could have cried. I almost did. Instead, I laughed. A short, bitter sound that felt foreign in my own throat. Fine. If they wanted a trip with Lauren, they could have one. But not on my dime. I drove home on autopilot, my mind racing ahead of me. The moment I stepped through my front door, I tossed my keys onto the table, yanked out my laptop, and logged into every travel account I had used to book their trip. Hotel reservations? Cancelled. Private tours? Cancelled. First-class airline upgrades? Gone. Every click felt like pulling another thorn from my skin. By the time I closed my laptop, my inbox was flooded with cancellation confirmations. A strange, heady satisfaction filled the hollowness in my chest. Let them figure it out. Let them explain themselves to the front desk clerks in Paris, to the tour guides wondering why no one showed up. They could enjoy the trip they stole, but not the life I had built for them. Not anymore. I sat back on my couch, listening to the blissful silence of my empty house. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the afterthought. I felt like the beginning of something different. Something better. Something that finally belonged to me. The first call came before their plane even landed. I was unpacking my own suitcase, the one I had so carefully packed for a trip that would never happen, when my phone buzzed against the coffee table. I glanced over and saw my mom's name lighting up the screen. I ignored it, let it ring out. A minute later, a text popped up. Violet, something's wrong. The hotel can't find our reservation. Call me. I set the phone back down, picked up a dress I had folded with such hope just days ago, and hung it neatly back in my closet. The buzzing continued. Another call. Another text. Violet, this isn't funny. Fix this. I let out a long breath, steadying the anger boiling in my chest. Fix it. Of course that's what they expected. That's what I always did. Wasn't it? Smooth things over. Make it right. Make it easier for everyone but me. By the time I finished unpacking, there were half a dozen missed calls and a flurry of increasingly frantic texts. Violet, the hotel says the reservation was cancelled. Lauren is freaking out. You need to call and fix this now. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the screen, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility pressing against my ribs. And then, for the first time in my life, I didn't crumble under it. I smiled. They had made their choice. They had decided that Lauren's convenience mattered more than my years of planning. My sacrifice, my heart. They could deal with the fallout too. I silenced the phone and made myself a cup of tea, savoring the strange, giddy sense of freedom blooming in my chest. For the first time, their panic wasn't my problem to solve. The next day, the storm escalated. The messages poured in like a flood, first from my mom, then Lauren, then my dad. Violet, this is so petty. We're stranded. You're ruining everything. You need to grow up and fix this now. Each one more indignant than the last. Each one blind to the reality they had created. I spent the morning cleaning the house, music blasting through the speakers. I organized my bookshelves. I deep cleaned the kitchen. Every scrub of the counter, every sweep of the broom felt like wiping away another layer of guilt that had clung to me for too long. By evening, curiosity got the better of me. I checked my voicemail. The first few were furious. My mom's voice shrill and crackling through the speaker. Violet, you need to call the hotel immediately. This is unacceptable. We're your family. You don't do this to family. I laughed, a real, full-bellied laugh that startled even me. Family. What a convenient word to throw around when it suited them. Lauren's messages were worse, dripping with entitlement. You're acting like a child. Violet, grow up. Just call and fix it already. The bitterness in her voice was almost delicious. The golden child, stranded in a foreign country, realizing that for once, someone wasn't going to save her. I didn't respond. I made dinner instead, sat at my tiny kitchen table and ate slowly, savoring the quiet that was no longer laced with resentment. That night, as I curled up in bed, I let myself remember all the times I had been cast aside. The birthdays overshadowed by Lauren's crises. The graduations met with polite indifference. The holidays spent feeling invisible while she soaked up all the attention like sunlight. They had taught me that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. And now, I was teaching them something in return. The third day, my dad called. His message was different, quieter. Almost pleading. Violet, we need to talk. This isn't right. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But sorry doesn't undo a lifetime of being the afterthought. Sorry doesn't erase the sting of standing in that driveway, watching my sister take my place without even a flicker of shame. Sorry doesn't erase the way they had always made me feel. Disposable. I poured another cup of tea, letting the warmth seep into my hands, and decided to pick up the next call. It didn't take long. My phone buzzed again, and without thinking, I answered. My mom's voice hit me like a slap. What did you do, Violet? The hotel says everything's cancelled. We can't check into anything. We're stuck. I let her rant, letting the words roll over me like static. When she finally paused for breath, I said simply, I cancelled everything. The silence that followed was sharp and satisfying. Why would you do that? She hissed, her voice low and furious now. I smiled into the receiver. Maybe because you decided to take Lauren on the trip I spent 2 years planning and paying for. Maybe because you made it clear that I didn't matter. Don't be dramatic, she snapped. Lauren needed this more. I almost laughed again. The entitlement. The absolute certainty that their betrayal was justified because it made things easier for Lauren. Enjoy your trip, I said sweetly. Oh wait, you can't. And I hung up. I turned off my phone after that, silencing the endless buzzing, the desperate attempts to guilt me back into place. I spent the next few days living quietly, reclaiming pieces of myself one slow breath at a time. I cleaned, I cooked, I read novels I'd been meaning to for years. I went for long walks without telling anyone where I was going. It was strange at first. This life without their constant demands. Strange, but not lonely. For the first time in years, I was choosing myself. And it felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. They could rage. They could spin whatever story they wanted to the rest of the family. But I knew the truth. And for once, that was enough. By the time their flight landed back home, the silence between us had solidified into something tangible. Like a wall of glass they kept pounding on but couldn't break through. I knew they would come looking for me eventually. It was inevitable. People like them didn't accept consequences easily. Sunday afternoon came crisp and bright. The kind of day that used to make me believe anything could be fixed with a cup of coffee and a good conversation. Not today. Today, I sat on my porch, sipping slowly, waiting for the inevitable. Their taxi pulled up with a screech. And out they spilled, Lauren first, dragging her designer luggage with all the grace of a petulant child. Followed by my mom, her lips pressed into a thin line. And my dad, looking older and more worn than I remembered. They marched up the driveway like a battalion ready for battle, their faces twisted with a cocktail of frustration and self-righteousness. Lauren was the first to speak, of course. Her voice rang out sharp and shrill across the quiet afternoon. I hope you're happy, Violet, she snapped, arms crossed, chin jutting forward like she expected me to crumble right there. I didn't move from my seat. I just raised my coffee cup slightly, as if toasting her tantrum. Happy about what exactly? I asked, my voice calm, detached. Our trip was a disaster. My mom barked, her hands flying up in exasperation. We stayed in terrible hotels. We ate awful food. We missed all the tours you booked. Everything was ruined. I took another slow sip of coffee, savoring the moment. Sounds rough, I said. Lauren threw her hands up. This isn't funny, Violet. You did this on purpose. You set us up to fail. I finally set my cup down, feeling the old anger stirring low and steady in my chest, but refusing to let it take over. Not this time. I wasn't here to scream or cry or beg for understanding. I was here to tell the truth. No, I said clearly. I planned a trip for the three of us. I spent years saving for it. I poured my heart into it. You're the ones who decided I didn't belong. My mom's face flushed a deep, angry red. That's not fair, she sputtered. We thought you'd understand. Lauren needed this. There it was. Again. The unspoken rule that had governed my entire life. Lauren needs it more. Lauren deserves it more. Lauren. Always Lauren. You're right, I said, standing up, meeting their shocked faces head on. It's not fair. It's never been fair. My dad shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the street as if hoping a neighbor might intervene and save him from this conversation. I have spent my whole life being the one who understood. I continued, my voice rising despite myself. The one who swallowed it, smiled through it, made it easier for everyone else. And for what? To be tossed aside the moment Lauren wanted something? You're overreacting, Lauren said, rolling her eyes. The dismissiveness in her tone snapped something in me. Am I? I said, stepping forward, feeling the fire at my back now. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I finally reacted exactly right. You took my trip, you took my plans, my sacrifices, and handed them to someone else like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. My mom reached out then. Maybe to placate me, maybe to silence me, but I stepped back. Don't, I said sharply. Don't pretend now. You made your choice. We didn't mean to hurt you. My dad said, but even he sounded unconvinced. You didn't even think about me. I corrected. That's the point. The silence that followed stretched between us. Heavy and undeniable. Finally, I picked up my bag from the porch swing and slung it over my shoulder. I'm glad you're home safe, I said, my voice steady, but don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I'm done being the afterthought. I deserve more than that. My kids, my future, they deserve more than that. Lauren scoffed, muttering something under her breath. But I didn't stop walking. I made it to my car, opened the door, and slid inside without looking back. As I pulled away from the house that had once been the center of my world, I realized something profound. It wasn't just about the trip. It was about every missed birthday, every ignored achievement, every time I'd been expected to smile and nod while Lauren soaked up the love and praise that I had scraped and clawed for. It was about years of being told, without words but with actions, that I was always second best. Not anymore. When I got home, I set my keys on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. It didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. It felt earned. Later that night, Grace came over, bringing a bottle of wine and a pizza piled high with every topping I loved. You did it, she said, clinking her glass against mine. You finally chose yourself. I smiled. A real one this time. Not the tight, brittle thing I'd worn for years. Yeah, I said, feeling the truth of it settle deep in my bones. I did. And for the first time in my life, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like the beginning. The days after I walked away from my parents' driveway passed like water slipping through my fingers, slow and fast all at once. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no constant buzzing from my phone demanding my time, my forgiveness, my attention. There was just space. Wide, terrifying, exhilarating space. I didn't fill it with noise the way I might have in the past. I didn't rush to prove I was okay. I just let it be. Grace stopped by often, armed with coffee and sarcasm, refusing to let me sink back into old habits of self-doubt. You did something most people only dream about, she said one afternoon as we sat on my porch watching the sun dip low over the trees. You chose yourself. Don't you dare forget how brave that was. I nodded, but some days it was harder than others. Some days, the guilt crept in like a fog, thick and heavy, whispering that maybe I'd been too harsh, too ungrateful, too cold. But then I would remember standing in that driveway, watching my own family treat me like a second thought, and the fog would clear. I wasn't being cruel. I was surviving. It took time, but I started piecing together a new kind of life. A life where I didn't schedule everything around someone else's needs. A life where I took up space unapologetically. I redecorated my living room first, stripping away the hand-me-downs that had always felt more like relics of guilt than gifts. I painted the walls a warm, deep blue, the kind of color that made the room feel like a hug, and bought a second-hand couch that I actually loved. Worn but comfortable, like me. I started going to local cafes on weekends, bringing a journal with no expectations attached. I wrote about things I wanted, not things I was supposed to want. I wrote about dreams that had nothing to do with earning anyone's approval. The idea of traveling alone had always terrified me. Travel was supposed to be about sharing experiences, about laughter and late-night adventures with people you loved. But love had looked very different for me, and maybe it was time to rewrite what it could mean. One evening, after a long day of work and a quiet dinner with myself, I opened my laptop and started looking up solo travel ideas. Italy, Spain, Greece, places that had lived in the back of my mind like half-forgotten wishes. I clicked through photos of cobblestone streets and sun-drenched plazas, of ancient ruins and bustling open-air markets. And something inside me cracked open. Not grief, not loss, hope. The next morning, with a steadier hand than I expected, I booked a ticket to Rome. One ticket, no backup plan, no safety net. It felt reckless. It felt terrifying. It felt right. The weeks leading up to the trip passed in a blur of planning and work. But this time, every decision was mine alone. No compromises, no double-checking if someone else would be comfortable. When the day finally came, I boarded the plane with nothing but a carry-on bag, a battered leather journal, and a heart still stitched together by trembling hands but stronger than it had ever been. Rome was everything I hadn't even dared to dream of. The city pulsed with life, chaotic and beautiful and endlessly messy. I wandered narrow alleys lined with laundry strung between windows, ate pasta in tiny restaurants where no one spoke English but everyone smiled like they knew a secret, and stood in the shadow of ruins so old they made all my heartaches feel like a blink. No one rushed me, no one corrected me, no one made me feel small. I moved at my own pace, learning how to be alone without being lonely. One afternoon, sitting on the Spanish steps with a gelato melting faster than I could eat it, I pulled out my journal and stared at the blank page. I didn't write about my parents. I didn't write about Lauren. I wrote about sunsets over terracotta rooftops. About the way the air smelled like hope and roasted chestnuts. About the way my own laughter, free and unguarded, had startled me the night before when I got lost and ended up dancing with strangers in a piazza lit by fairy lights. I wrote about dreams, not damage. By the end of the week, I knew something had shifted deep inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The last night before my flight home, I sat at a small cafe overlooking the Arno River in Florence, sipping wine and watching the lights ripple across the water. I thought about who I had been before all this, the girl who would have cancelled her own trip to make sure everyone else was comfortable. She was still a part of me, but she didn't steer the ship anymore. And as much as the idea still hurts sometimes, I realized I didn't need my family's approval to feel whole. I already was. I didn't call them when I got home. I didn't send pictures or updates. I unpacked slowly, savoring each little memento I had brought back, a leather journal, a hand-painted ceramic mug, a few postcards I'd never send. Each one felt like a quiet promise to myself. You belong to you now. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. The weeks after my trip felt different, as if the world had subtly shifted on its axis and no one but me could tell. I moved through my days with a sense of calm I hadn't known I was capable of. Like I had finally set down a burden I never should have been carrying in the first place. I spent my mornings sipping coffee on the porch, the sun warming my bare feet as Ethan and Emily played on the worn-out swing set in the backyard. I worked on my projects, built new routines, and found joy in the smallest things. The smell of fresh bread baking in the oven, the laughter of my children echoing through the house, the quiet satisfaction of a life that belonged solely to me. My phone stayed mostly silent, and I let it. There were a few tentative texts from my parents, messages that danced around apologies without ever quite landing on them. Hope you had a nice trip. Maybe we can talk soon. Little lines cast into the water, waiting to see if I would bite. I didn't, not out of anger. Not anymore, but because I had finally learned that forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. Forgiveness can mean moving forward, without them. One afternoon, as I was sorting laundry and humming to myself, the phone rang again. This time, I answered. It was my mom. Her voice was different, quieter, more careful. "Hi, Violet," she said, almost hesitating. I wanted to say I'm glad you had a good trip. You deserved it." I didn't respond right away. I folded a tiny t-shirt, smoothing it down with deliberate care. "And," she continued, her voice wavering, "we've been thinking a lot about everything. About how things have been. We know we hurt you. We know it wasn't fair." I set the shirt down, my heart thudding slow and steady against my ribs. "I'm not asking for anything," she added quickly. I wanted you to know we see it now. Truly. And we're sorry." There was a time when I would have burst into tears at those words. desperate to believe them, desperate to erase the years of pain with a single conversation. But not now. Now, I listened carefully, feeling the weight of her words without letting them drag me under. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. My voice was steady, firm but not cruel. "But it's going to take more than words." "I know," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "and we're willing to do the work. If you'll let us." I told her honestly that I wasn't sure. That trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all. We ended the call on a fragile but peaceful note. And for the first time in a long time, I felt no obligation to rush into anything. The healing, if it happened, would be on my terms, not theirs. In the weeks that followed, I lived my life. I focused on my children, on my work, on my own happiness. I went to brunch with Grace, who toasted me over mimosas for finally choosing myself. I started a photography class at the community center, capturing tiny snapshots of beauty that felt like secret treasures tucked into my days. And I planned another trip, this time to Greece, just me and the twins. A new adventure built on new memories, free from the shadow of old wounds. One evening, after tucking Ethan and Emily into bed, I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, the night air cool against my skin. I scrolled through the photos from Italy, smiling at the images of sunsets and street performers and tiny cafes tucked between ancient stone walls. And then, almost absently, I opened a new folder on my phone and labeled it, New Life. Because that's what this was. Not a life shaped by their expectations, their guilt, their endless shifting demands. A life shaped by me. Mine. A few days later, a letter arrived, a real one, in my mother's handwriting. Inside, she wrote about starting therapy with my dad, about facing the patterns they had passed down without even realizing it. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't promise they had changed. She simply said they were trying, and that whether I chose to be part of their lives again or not. She loved me. I folded the letter carefully and set it aside. I wasn't ready to respond. Maybe someday I would be. But for now, I had everything I needed. I had peace. I had freedom. I had a future, one not tied to being someone's second choice. As the stars winked awake across the darkening sky, I closed my eyes and made a silent promise to myself. Never again would I shrink to fit into someone else's story. I was writing my own now. And it was just getting started.